Let's get one thing straight right now. Nobody in medieval Europe ever woke up, stretched under a lice-infested wool blanket and said, "You know what would really elevate my brand today? Murdering a bishop in his sleep and hiding in a barrel of onions for 3 days." That never happened. Because despite what Hollywood video games and overly confident Halloween costumes might lead you to believe, being a medieval assassin wasn't mysterious, sexy, or even remotely cool. It was miserable, it was lonely, and it was, more often than not, a one-way ticket to a shallow grave and a posthumous reputation as some weirdo who talked to himself and died in an alley. The real story of medieval assassins isn't a tale of silent blades and rooftop parkour. It's a tale of desperation, a tale of filth, bad food, worse pay, and the kind of social isolation that makes you nostalgic for jury duty. Being an assassin wasn't a career. It wasn't even a choice. It was where you landed when literally every other option had been set on fire. This job was not a path to glory. It was a last stop before the abyss. So tonight, as you cozy up under your weighted blanket or drift towards sleep, listening to the gentle hum of your fan, let's wander into the world of these not-so-elite killers. Let's talk about the truth. Not the myth. Not the Assassin's Creed version with hidden blades and rooftop escapes. But the uncomfortable, unsexy, totally unglamorous reality of medieval murder for hire. Buckle up, or better yet, don't. Because if you were a medieval assassin, you'd probably have to ditch the belt. Too noisy, too obvious, and it doesn't really go with peasant chic. To begin with, no one trained to be an assassin. You didn't enroll in Murder U and graduate summa cum stab. You didn't get recruited by a secret order of shadow monks who gifted you a hood and a cool new name, like Corvus. What actually happened was something more like this. You were a starving ex-soldier with a limp, a criminal record, and exactly 0 future prospects. Maybe you got tossed out of the army for stealing boots. Maybe your village burned down and your goat ran off with a merchant. Maybe you were already the kind of guy who people avoided in taverns. Whatever the reason, you were desperate enough to take a job that involved climbing into people's homes at night and reducing their net worth to 0. In fact, the only real qualification you needed to be an assassin was this. You had to be invisible. Not literally, despite what peasants thought, but socially. You had to be so low on the food chain that if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would write a song or light a candle. You had to be a ghost before you even picked up a blade. That's why the best recruits weren't trained warriors or noble outcasts. They were the overlooked, the unwanted. The guys who knew how to blend into a crowd, climb over a wall without sneezing, and vanish into the background like they'd never been there at all. And let's talk about the job itself, because spoiler alert, it sucked. No weekends off. No HR department. No uniform other than whatever stained cloak you found hanging on a fence post. You got paid in silver, if you were lucky. And by lucky, I mean you lived long enough to spend it. Most clients paid half, up front, then ghosted you faster than a modern Tinder match once the job was done, if they didn't try to kill you first. Also, your assignments weren't exactly easy mode. You didn't get hired to eliminate Bob the shoeless turnip farmer. You got tasked with killing people like Baron Rupert the Cruel, who just happened to live in a fortress with 12 guards, 3 dogs, a moat, and a cook, who also doubled as a spy. And if you pulled it off, great. Now run. Because succeeding in this line of work just meant more people wanted you dead. And guess what? They had names and titles and actual armies. Let's not forget the equipment. If you're imagining sleek daggers, compact crossbows, or James Bond-level gadgets, let me stop you right there. Your toolkit was a mix of rusty blades, cheap rope, and whatever you could stuff into your boot without drawing attention. Poison? That was just moldy soup with a prayer. Most of it didn't kill. It just made the guy barf and wonder why his stew tasted funny. And that's if you didn't mix up the dosage and poison yourself first, which happened more often than you'd think. Medieval chemistry was mostly just guesswork, trial, error, and dying horribly. And even if somehow everything went perfectly, if you snuck in, did the deed, and vanished into the night like a shadow, you didn't get glory. You didn't get songs or legends or a statue in the square. You got silence, the kind that makes history textbooks shrug and say, some dude probably did this. That was your legacy. A footnote. A whisper. A maybe. Because being a medieval assassin meant being nothing. No name, no fame, no future. You weren't a knight, a hero, or even a proper villain. You were a disposable tool that vanished the second it was used. And the people who hired you? They liked it that way. If you died, great. If you succeeded, also great. But don't expect a bonus or even a handshake. So why did anyone do it? Simple. Because they had nothing left to lose. They were starving, hunted, broken, invisible people doing the only thing that guaranteed them a few coins and one more night of not dying. It wasn't power. It wasn't freedom. It was survival. Barely. And even that came at a price. Because in this line of work, success didn't set you free. It just made you more dangerous, which meant everyone wanted you gone, even your own employer. The truth is, the world of medieval assassins wasn't a romantic noir fantasy. It was a bloody, brutal, thankless mess. It chewed people up, spat out husks, and left behind stories that were either buried or twisted into myth. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that. We replaced the horror with heroism. We gave the shadows swagger. We made the job look sleek. But tonight, we're taking it back. One rusty dagger at a time. No one in the Middle Ages sat by the hearth, staring into the fire, and thought, you know what would really fulfill me? Becoming a contract killer for hire, living in barrels, and avoiding daylight like an unpaid debt. It wasn't a dream job. It wasn't even a plan. It was more like a consequence, a side effect of every single other option collapsing in spectacular fashion. Because the truth is, nobody chose to be a medieval assassin. It was something you became only after the world chewed you up, spit you out, and left you standing in an alley with a rusty blade and nowhere else to go. Forget the sleek, hooded image of video games and Hollywood. There were no epic training arcs, no wax-sealed scrolls inviting you to join a secret brotherhood of shadow monks. What you had were desperate men, former soldiers tossed out of service, petty criminals too talented to rot in jail, disgraced mercenaries with nowhere else to run. Sometimes they weren't even that. Just nameless peasants with nothing left but a grudge and a decent sense of balance. If you were wealthy, you didn't become an assassin. You hired one. Nobles didn't slip through castle corridors with daggers in their sleeves. They paid the guy who could blend in with the drunks, slip past the guards, and do the dirty work no lord wanted on his conscience. Assassination was not a noble profession. It was a silent transaction. Coin traded for blood, and silence traded for survival. So how did a job like this start? It didn't come with a job posting or a recruiter sliding into your DMs. It usually started with a whisper in a darkened tavern. Maybe someone noticed you didn't flinch when a knife hit the table. Maybe you had a reputation, quiet, fast, discreet. Maybe you'd escaped prison once or twice. Whatever the reason, someone, somewhere, decided you were the kind of person who might be able to fix a very inconvenient human problem. And so, one night, a stranger sat beside you. No names, no eye contact. Just a pouch of silver pushed across the table and a name you didn't want to hear. And that name was never Greg the lazy innkeeper or Martha the boring baker. No, you were asked to take out someone important, someone dangerous, someone guarded, like a vault and hated like taxes. It could be a corrupt baron who had grown too ambitious, a bishop hoarding gold like a dragon, or a military commander whose survival was suddenly very inconvenient to certain parties. Your target always had bodyguards, always lived behind walls, and always had people who would absolutely murder you back if you got it wrong. The pay was technically tempting. Not good, not fair, but tempting. Because by the time you were even, considering the job, you had nothing left to lose. No family, no future, no warm fire waiting for you back home. Just cold nights, hunger, and a slow awareness that your life had already veered too far off course to come back. So you took the job. Maybe you justified it. Maybe you told yourself they deserved it. Maybe you didn't care. But either way, once the deal was made, you were committed. And it wasn't just the job that was dangerous. It was the lifestyle. There were no perks, no medical plan, no retirement, no weekends at the market. You didn't exactly walk around with a sign reading, "Discreet eliminations. Ask for Gerald." You kept your mouth shut, moved fast, and prayed your boots didn't squeak. You told people you were a traveling tinker, a rag seller, or some poor soul on pilgrimage. Anything but what you really were. Because the second anyone found out, you were either dead or hunted, or worse, used again. You didn't work often because work wasn't regular. Assassination was feast or famine, mostly famine. You might go weeks without hearing anything, then suddenly have 2 jobs in one night. The first for a noble who paid in French coin, the second for a priest who promised you absolution if you took care of a problem before Sunday Mass. The jobs were irregular, the pay was inconsistent, and the risk, constant. And you didn't live anywhere. You hid, in haylofts, under floorboards, behind taverns, inside ruined mills, or occasionally, yes, in a barrel. Because assassins didn't sleep in inns with feather, beds, and a hot meal. They didn't have friends. They didn't build relationships. The safest assassin was the one who was never seen twice in the same place. And when you did strike, you had to be perfect. You didn't get a second chance. You didn't leave notes. You didn't get to pause and double-check the name. The job wasn't just about killing. It was about making sure no one ever knew it was you. Your best work left no witnesses, no blood trail, no clue that anything had happened at all. You weren't just a killer. You were a ghost. But ghosts don't last. You could vanish from records, but not from memory. Eventually, someone would talk. Someone would remember a face, a movement, a rumor, and suddenly your name, or the fake one you used, was on someone else's lips, on someone's bounty list, on a parchment tacked to a wooden post with your face scratched out and a reward beneath it. And then the roles reversed. You weren't the hunter anymore. You were the prey. That was the job. That was the life. You started alone. You worked alone. And you died alone. No fame, no fanfare. Just a slit throat in the woods, or a body left to rot in a back alley. You weren't a warrior. You weren't a hero. You weren't even a villain, really. You were a problem solver with a very narrow skill set and a very short shelf life. And when you finally bled out in the mud, with your last breath fogging the air and your last coin still warm in your pocket, no one sang for you. No one mourned. No one remembered. Because being a medieval assassin wasn't about glory. It was about erasure. And that's how your day ended. Like every other. With silence. If you think being a medieval assassin meant you were trained in mountaintop, temples under the watchful eye of some wise, beard-stroking master, think again. There was no sacred dojo, no ancient order, no secret parchment scroll titled Intro to Murder 101. Most assassins weren't the product of discipline and devotion. They were the result of accidents that didn't kill them. The only school was the street, and the only diploma was still having both kidneys by the end of your 3rd job. There was no curriculum, no training montage where you sharpened your dagger while doing upside-down push-ups in the rain. What you had was desperation, bad lighting, and an extremely short learning curve. The first time you tried, maybe you failed. Maybe you got chased off by dogs, lost your grip on a windowsill, or ran face first into a castle guard on a bathroom break. But if you were lucky, and lucky here, means you didn't get stabbed in the liver. You learned something. You got faster, quieter, meaner. You survived. Because talent didn't matter. Skill was optional. The only thing that separated you from a body in the ditch was sheer, stupid survival instinct. You didn't become good. You became invisible. You didn't practice. You adapted. Every job was a test. You passed by not dying. You failed by making the obituary section of the next village sermon. Most assassins were amateurs. Talented amateurs. Maybe. But still amateurs. You didn't have instructors. If you were blessed by the gods, or just unusually charming, maybe a thief or mercenary showed you how to walk without making your boots squeak on cobblestones. Maybe someone older pointed out how to not fall through a thatched roof. But there was no mentoring program, no internship. If another assassin gave you advice, it was usually seconds before disappearing forever, or dying in a ditch, which meant that wisdom came with a visual aid. Why? Because assassins didn't retire. They vanished. Either by running away fast enough, or by dying quietly and alone. There was no retirement banquet, no pension, and certainly no old-timer with a limp telling tales over ale. The idea of generational mentorship was a luxury reserved for blacksmiths and priests. In your line of work, experience got you killed slower. That was it. Weapons training? Please. What did you think you'd carry? A finely crafted broadsword, forged by royal commission? Not unless you stole it. And even then, good luck hiding it under a cloak. Your go-to tools were simple. A dagger, maybe a garrote if you were feeling ambitious, and anything else that could stab, choke, or blunt someone into permanent silence. You didn't have gear. You had trash that could kill. A stolen knife, a broken arrow tip, a sharpened spoon if that's all you had. And trust me, people have been murdered with less. If you had military training, great. That meant you knew which end of the blade to hold. But it didn't guarantee success. Killing someone in the middle of a battlefield is one thing. Killing someone quietly in their sleep while sneaking past servants, dogs, and at least one very alert night watchman. With a grudge, that's an entirely different level of chaos. And poison? Oh boy. You want to talk trial and error? Heavy emphasis on error. There were no handy little labels, no exact dosages, no pharmacist to double-check your mixture. You learned by experience. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes your target got a little dizzy, burped loudly, and became paranoid about stew. Sometimes you accidentally drank your own concoction because medieval kitchens didn't label cups. There was no poison control. There was no antidote hotline. Just gut instinct and herbal guesswork. If you were smart, you kept your poison separate. If you weren't, you died horribly and became someone else's cautionary tale. Everything was improvised. You didn't have blueprints of the building. You didn't know where the nobles kept their exits. You figured it out the hard way, by climbing through a window and realizing too late you'd crept into the servants' quarters again. You learned layout by wandering through danger. You learned timing by almost getting caught. You learned stealth by slipping past the cook while she was yelling at a stable boy. And sometimes you didn't learn anything, because you were dead before the lesson arrived. This wasn't a profession of honor. It was a profession of necessity. There was no uniform, no ceremony, no moral compass, just shadows, sweat, and the knowledge that if you didn't get it right the first time, there wouldn't be a second. You didn't get better because you trained. You got better because you watched others fail and decided you didn't want to end up like them. You knew exactly how fragile your success was. Every job was a gamble, every client a potential trap. You could prepare for weeks, study routines, learn where the target kept his boots, and how many steps it took for the guard with asthma to climb the main stairwell. You could know all that. And still, one wrong breath could mean everything falling apart. A sneeze, a creaky floorboard, a maid who came back early to feed the cat. That's what got assassins killed. Not swords, but squeaky shoes and bad timing. And even if you survived, you didn't become a master. You didn't level up. You just limped into the next job with a new scar, a slightly better dagger, and the creeping suspicion that your luck was on borrowed time. There were no belts to earn, no levels to unlock. Only bruises, bloodstains, and the slow, inevitable knowledge that every success was just another day borrowed from death. You weren't elite. You weren't chosen. You were a survivor, and you were very much alone. Because at the end of the day, your real education wasn't forged in rituals or taught in hidden guilds. It was forged in fear. It was taught by rooftops and locked doors and guards who didn't sleep enough. And graduation? That wasn't a ceremony. It was still breathing. Let's kill the fantasy right here. No one became a medieval assassin for the paycheck. No one rubbed their hands together after a kill, grinned under a hood and thought, "Ah, yes, now I can finally afford that new horse saddle and a summer home by the moat." The myth of the assassin for hire as a calculated professional, operating for cold hard silver with financial precision, is laughable. And I mean that in the you either laugh or cry sense. Because in reality, the promise of coin, the one thing dangling in front of your starving face like a rotting carrot, was a lie, a cruel, deadly, shimmering lie. Oh, the pitch always sounded great. A pouch of silver. Half now, half later. Maybe a little bonus if you made it look like an accident or left the client's name completely out of the story. Which, of course, was the entire point. It was always whispered in the dark, at the back of some suspiciously empty tavern, by someone whose face you couldn't quite see, and whose breath smelled like desperation and cheap wine. And always, the coin purse jingled just enough to hook you. Not enough to live forever, just enough to die for. But here's the trick. Half now, half later is a medieval code phrase. Loosely translated, it means you'll get the rest of your payment never. Or worse, you'll get a knife in the ribs and dumped in a well. The payout wasn't just uncertain, it was actively dangerous. Because if your client was clever, and most of them were just clever enough to be cruel, they didn't want you to come back. In their eyes, a successful assassin wasn't a hero. He was a loose end, a liability, a potential blackmailer with blood on his hands and the memory of their face in his head. And dead men don't talk. So even if you did everything right, slipped in, stabbed silently, made it look clean, vanished like smoke, you still had a better chance of catching the plague than getting paid. Best case scenario? Your client moved away unexpectedly the day after the hit. Worst case? Someone was waiting in the shadows when you returned, and you'd learn the hard way that a blade to the gut is cheaper than a bonus, especially when you've already done the work and can't exactly file a complaint with the medieval Better Business Bureau. And let's be honest, the job itself wasn't worth what they paid anyway. You weren't just risking your life. You were erasing it. You spent 3 days crouched in a haystack riddled with fleas, sweating in total silence, wondering if the smell was the straw or your rotting moral compass. You broke into stone towers using methods that felt like a mix of acrobatics, guesswork, and divine intervention. You killed someone in their bed and spent the next week praying the guards wouldn't remember your boots. And after all that, you got, what? A handful of tarnished coins and a nod. Even when the money did show up, it never added up. You couldn't spend it in your own name. You couldn't flash it around. And you certainly couldn't invest it. There was no assassin retirement fund, no medieval 401k. You hid the money, changed towns, maybe shaved your head, and started pretending to be Brother Lucian, the wandering monk with a nervous twitch and an allergy to eye contact. And don't think you could just walk away when things got weird, because sometimes the job wasn't even real. That's right. Assassin sting operations were very much a thing. You'd be given a target, something high value and high risk, only to discover that the Baron you were supposed to kill was actually a decoy surrounded by guards with orders to capture you alive. Or not alive. The key detail being not free. You'd walk in thinking you were about to change someone's destiny with a blade to the heart, and instead, you'd get a rope around your neck and a fast-track appointment with the gallows. And nobody would save you. Because you couldn't. Exactly scream in court, "Your Honor, I was hired to kill Lord Edmund, and I demand compensation." The judge wouldn't ask for proof of your contract. He'd just ask where to put the noose. So eventually, if you lived long enough, you learned the one golden rule of assassination. Economics. Trust no one. Not the noble who said he admired your work. Not the merchant who swore this was the last job. Not the weird little scribe who smelled like ink and promised this hit would change your life. It did. Mostly by shortening, you stopped hoping for a better deal. You started demanding payment up front. Not because you were greedy, but because you were tired of dying for nothing. And even then, you watched your back. You took the silver, but assumed you'd need to use it to bribe your way out of something within the week. You never let the client know your real name. You never met in the same place twice, and you never assumed they wanted you alive after the job. Because if they were smart, and they usually were, they were already sharpening the knife for you too. The job wasn't a job. It was a gamble. A rigged game played in the dark with rules you only found out after you lost. And even when you won, even when the target died, the mission succeeded and the client didn't stab you in the back, you still walked away with more enemies than before. Because now people knew. They whispered. They asked questions. They remembered your eyes, your walk, the strange man who never gave his name and only ordered soup. You couldn't keep that up forever. You either quit, which meant running and hiding until the end of your life, or you got greedy, took one job too many, and learned what it felt like to be on the wrong end of the business. But there was no real way out. Not when everyone you ever worked for had more money, more power, and more reasons to make sure you disappeared. So no, the money wasn't worth it. It was never worth it. It was a story told to desperate men to keep them desperate. A lure, a lie, a shiny promise at the bottom of a blood-soaked well. And yet people kept taking the deal. Because at the end of the day, a few silver coins were still better than starvation. Still better than nothing. Still better than being forgotten before you even had the chance to become invisible. Forget everything you think you know about assassin. Gear. Seriously, just throw it out. The wrist blades, the smoke bombs, the cloaks lined with hidden throwing knives. All fiction. Stylish fiction, sure, but about as historically accurate as a time-traveling ninja on a hoverboard. Because when it came to real medieval assassins, the gear wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even reliable. Most of the time, your equipment was just a sad collection of items you could steal, sharpen, or stuff into a moldy boot without clanking loud enough to wake the whole castle. There was no armory, no weapons upgrade screen, no helpful merchant, selling you enchanted daggers named Whisperfang. Your standard-issue toolkit looked like a failed blacksmith's trash pile. A knife, if you were lucky. And by lucky, we mean you found one that wasn't chipped to hell, rusted beyond recognition, or previously embedded in a guard's spleen. You didn't care about craftsmanship. You cared about sharpness, bare minimum functionality. Ideally, something that didn't smell like blood sausage and regret. If you happened upon a halfway decent blade, you held onto it like it was your soulmate. You didn't polish it. You prayed over it. That dagger wasn't just your weapon. It was your lifeline, your only insurance plan, and your one reliable friend. Which, in assassin life, is saying a lot. Because friends, not really a thing. But a dagger that didn't snap mid-thrust? Now that was trust. What else did you carry? Whatever fit under a ragged cloak and didn't jingle. Maybe a garrote, if you could find string or wire that didn't fray under tension. Rope, always handy. Useful for climbing, tying off windows, or strangling someone silently in a barn. But rope was also bulky and loud, and if you didn't know what you were doing, Trying to tie a kill knot while your target flailed around like a drunk chicken usually ended with someone screaming, and it wasn't always them. Did you have a bow? Sometimes. If you could find one. If you could shoot it. If you could smuggle it into a nobleman's palace while pretending to be a traveling candle vendor. But even then, long-range assassination was rare. Targets were heavily guarded, behind stone walls and iron gates, usually surrounded by a small army of men who took arrow-related crimes very personally. You weren't a sniper. You were a whisper with a knife, which meant most jobs were up close and unpleasantly personal. Let's talk poison. Everyone loves to imagine the sleek assassin, gliding through the shadows with a vial of liquid death tucked into their belt. The reality? Poison was unpredictable, messy, and wildly underwhelming. You weren't measuring doses with precision instruments. You were eyeballing crushed herbs, toad slime, and maybe some weird mushrooms you found under a log and hoped were deadly. Sometimes your victim died. Sometimes they just got a headache and threw up for 3 hours, then came back stronger and very suspicious of soup. You weren't trained in pharmacology. You were guessing, and sometimes you guessed wrong. One sip from the wrong cup, and congratulations, you just poisoned yourself. And if you were thinking of testing it beforehand, good. Luck finding someone willing to sample mystery juice without asking follow-up questions. Also, there was no medieval poison hotline. No Google search for, is this berry murdery or just spicy? It was chaos science with a high body count and a 50-50 shot of backfiring. Then came the improvisation, because when your one dagger got stuck, snapped, or fell into a latrine mid-escape, you didn't get a backup. There was no second blade strapped to your thigh. You had to make do. Maybe you grabbed a slate tile off a roof, maybe a nail from a beam, maybe your belt buckle if you were desperate and creative. There's at least one recorded case of an assassin using a sharp piece of chicken bone. Let that sink in. Bone. Poultry bone. Weaponized poultry. This wasn't a profession. It was a fever dream with a body count. Disguises? Let's just say subtlety was key, because style wasn't an option. You wore what helped you blend in. Peasant rags, mud-stained boots, maybe a monk's robe 2 sizes too big. You didn't have access to silks or leather armor. You had to look like the guy nobody remembered, and that meant stashing your tools wherever you could. In your boot, sewn into your hem, even inside hollowed-out bread if you were feeling particularly inspired. Yes, that's real. A loaf of bread could be your gear bag. Just pray no one got hungry before the kill, and heaven forbid your equipment made noise. One jingle, one clink, one echo in a stone corridor, and your entire operation fell apart faster than a medieval ladder. Silence wasn't just tactical, it was survival. So everything you carried had to be muffled, wrapped in cloth, tied tight, and double-checked before every move. You didn't want gear, you wanted ghosts, tools that vanished as easily as you did. There were no upgrades, no gear modding, no leather worker crafting you a personalized satchel of death. If your blade broke mid-job, you didn't pull out a spare. You found something, anything, sharp, and prayed it hit something vital. You weren't James Bond. You were a guy with a rock and a very clear understanding of what not to step on. And let's not pretend any of this was clean. Your blade smelled. Your rope was fraying. Your tools were crusted in rust and regret. You didn't look like a sleek predator. You looked like a half-starved rat with a knife problem. And yet somehow, you made it work. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't the gear that made the assassin. It was the desperation, the improvisation, the sheer, relentless refusal to die stupid. You didn't carry magic. You carried broken tools, duct tape, plans, and a bad attitude, and you still made it happen. That, more than anything, was the assassin's real weapon. The ability to do the impossible with a spoon, a rusted nail, and maybe a slice of bread. And that's how you stayed alive, until you didn't. If you thought Medieval assassins spent their nights stalking drunk peasants stumbling home from the tavern. Think again. The reality was far more perilous and politically charged. Targets weren't the lowly or the inebriated. They were the elite, the nobles, the clergy, the military commanders. These were individuals ensconced in layers of protection, both physical and societal, making the assassin's task a deadly game of chess, where one wrong move meant checkmate. Consider the assassination of Queen Gertrude of Marania in 1213. While on a hunting expedition in the Fleas Mountains, she was brutally murdered by a group of Hungarian lords. Their motive: discontent over her favoritism towards her German courtiers. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a calculated political statement, executed amidst the complexities of royal protection and courtly intrigue. Then there's the case of Pope John VIII, who met his end in 882, not by an external enemy, but by his own clerics. First poisoned, then clubbed to death, his assassination underscores the treacherous waters of ecclesiastical politics. The very individuals entrusted with his safety turned against him, highlighting that proximity to power often equated to proximity to danger. Targets, like these, weren't just physically protected. They were symbols of authority, their deaths sending ripples through the fabric of society. Assassins had to navigate not only the physical barriers, guards, walls, moats, but also the societal ones. Killing a noble or a high-ranking cleric wasn't just murder, it was an act of rebellion, a challenge to the established order. The challenges were manifold. Physically, these individuals were often surrounded by loyal guards, resided in fortified structures, and maintained strict routines designed to minimize vulnerability. Assassins had to be meticulous, studying their targets for weeks, understanding their habits, and identifying the rare moments of weakness. It wasn't uncommon for an assassin to spend days hidden in cramped, uncomfortable spaces, waiting for the opportune moment. Moreover, the psychological toll was immense. The knowledge that failure meant not just death, but often a gruesome one, weighed heavily. The assassin operated in isolation, unable to share their burden, constantly on edge, and perpetually in disguise. The line between hunter and hunted was razor thin, and the roles could reverse in an instant. In essence, the life of a medieval assassin targeting the elite was a perilous tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. Each mission was a high-stakes endeavor, demanding not just physical prowess and cunning, but also an iron will and a stomach for the macabre. The targets were never easy, and the path to them was littered with obstacles, both seen and unseen. Let's be clear. Medieval assassinations didn't happen in a single night. You didn't show up to the castle gates, flip your hood up, mutter something cryptic, and toss a knife into someone's heart like it was a Friday night bar fight. No. Assassination wasn't a moment. It was an exhausting process. A slow, agonizing burn through time, sweat, lies, and increasingly questionable hygiene. Every job required weeks, sometimes months, of planning, waiting, hiding, watching, and praying that when the moment finally came, you wouldn't sneeze and blow it all to hell. Because your target wasn't just some drunk fool who wandered into the wrong alley. No, you were going after someone important, someone guarded, someone paranoid. A noble, a bishop, a war general, someone who didn't walk anywhere without at least 2 sword-wielding bodyguards, 3 dogs, and a servant who always looked like he was one suspicious glance away from lighting the emergency bonfire. Which meant if you were going to get close enough to kill them, you had to do one thing first: become invisible. That didn't mean literal invisibility, though let's be honest, if you could have bottled some peasant moon magic and made yourself vanish, you absolutely would have. No, being invisible meant becoming unremarkable. You had to blend, slip into a household as a scullery maid, a stable hand, a chimney sweep with a backstory, and the ability to fake your way through a dozen menial tasks. If you couldn't convincingly hold a mop, saddle a horse, or carry chamber pots without dry heaving, you weren't getting anywhere near your mark. You started with surveillance, days, sometimes weeks, of watching, When did they eat? When did they sleep? Who came in and out of their chambers? Which door creaked the loudest? Which guard had asthma and needed a break halfway up the stairs? You memorized patrol patterns, mapped exits, counted torches, and figured out whether the cook liked to gossip and whether the stable boy could be bribed with an old coin and a wink. And when you finally infiltrated, you didn't relax. That was just level 1. Now came the performance. Because noble households weren't staffed with idiots. These people noticed everything. A servant who didn't know the name of the head chef? Suspicious. A scribe who didn't know how to hold? A quill? Game over. You had to play your role perfectly, 24 hours a day. You had to remember every lie, every cover name, every fake limp or regional accent. One slip and suddenly a jester with a surprisingly good memory would recognize that you've never worked in this kitchen before. And now you're being tackled by 3 guards and a very angry goose. The worst part? You had no idea when the opportunity would come. Maybe a week in, maybe a month, maybe never. You could wait for weeks, silently praying for your target to get careless, to linger alone, to take a shortcut, to drink a little too much at a feast. You didn't control the schedule. You just watched and waited, hiding in corners and storage closets, practicing your grip on a blade wrapped in cloth so it wouldn't reflect candlelight. Sometimes, the moment came during a feast. Maybe your target was drunk. Maybe the guards were distracted by a brawl or a spilled goblet. And there you were, 2 tables away, dressed as a lowly servant, heart pounding like war drums, while trying to remember if the dagger was under your belt or sewn into your sleeve. You weren't just trying to kill, you were trying to do it clean, quiet, fast, a single movement, in, out, gone. And let's not forget, just getting into the castle was a feat in itself. You might have had to sneak in disguised as a traveling merchant, or bribe a gate guard, or spend 3 freezing nights inside a hay cart just to get past the outer walls. You had no backup, no safe house inside. Once you were in, it was all or nothing. And if things went sideways, good luck getting out the same way you came in. Doors got locked, alarms were raised, the city went into lockdown. The same people who ignored you yesterday now remembered exactly what your face looked like and were ready to paint it on wanted posters with the helpful label, extremely stabby. And when the moment finally did arrive, when all the creeping and crawling and fake smiling finally paid off, you had exactly 1 shot. There was no do-over, no second attempt. You either struck true and vanished like smoke in the wind, or you became the lesson. Don't mess with the Duke. Remember what happened to that guy. Every detail had to work. The blade had to be sharp. The door had to be unlocked. The guard had to be asleep. The target had to be alone. Your disguise had to hold up. Your nerves had to hold still. And if even one thing failed, 1 floorboard creaked, 1 candle flared, 1 dog barked, everything crumbled. Because here's the dirty truth of the job. The kill wasn't the hard part. It was the orchestration, the endless setup, the brutal patience, the act of sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds of a castle breathing, knowing that somewhere inside, your target was sleeping under a thick blanket while you were crouched, behind a wine barrel, soaked in sweat, and praying the rats didn't give you away. The moment of violence lasted seconds. The preparation took weeks, and the weight of failure never left your shoulders. Success didn't feel like glory. It felt like relief. It felt like exhaling a breath you'd been holding for a month. It felt like running for your life with blood on your boots and a town that would soon wake up screaming. You didn't get to savor the victory. You got to escape, if you were lucky, and then start it all over again. Because being a medieval assassin wasn't about being deadly. It was about being invisible until the 1 second you needed to exist. All the glory belonged to the people who hired you. All the risk belonged to you. And all that preparation, all that exhausting, dehumanizing, Mind-breaking preparation? It bought you exactly one moment, and that moment had to be perfect. If you're envisioning medieval assassins as sleek figures draped in tailored hoods, gliding through shadows with the grace of a cat and the style of a runway model, it's time for a reality check. The truth is far grittier. Disguises weren't about fashion. They were about survival. They were less about looking cool and more about not getting caught. In the harsh world of medieval subterfuge, a successful disguise was one that made you invisible, not iconic. The romanticized image of the assassin cloaked in darkness, face partially obscured by a meticulously crafted hood, is a product of modern storytelling. In reality, such attire would have drawn unwanted attention. A hooded figure lurking in the alleys would have been as conspicuous as a peacock in a pigeon coop. The goal was to blend in, not stand out. Assassins adopted the garb of the common folk, tattered tunics, mud-stained boots, and the kind of grime that comes from days without a bath. They became beggars, merchants, monks, anyone who could move unnoticed through the crowd. Historical records suggest that the Nizari Ismaili, often referred to as the original assassins, were adept at this form of camouflage. They didn't don special uniforms or distinctive attire. Instead, they dressed like the locals, adopting the clothing and customs of the regions they infiltrated. This allowed them to get close to their targets without raising suspicion. The effectiveness of a disguise lay in its authenticity. It wasn't enough to wear the clothes. One had to embody the role. This meant understanding the behaviors, speech patterns, and routines of the persona they adopted. A fake merchant had to know the basics of trade. A pretend monk needed to recite prayers convincingly. Any slip could be fatal. The art of disguise was as much about performance as it was about appearance. Moreover, the materials available for disguises were rudimentary. There were no synthetic fabrics or advanced tailoring techniques. Assassins had to make do with what they could find or steal. This often meant repurposing old garments, using soot for makeup, or fashioning props from everyday items. The ingenuity lay in the ability to transform the mundane into the deceptive. It's also worth noting that the concept of a disguise wasn't always about changing one's appearance. Sometimes, it was about altering one's presence. Moving with confidence, avoiding eye contact, or adopting a particular gait could be just as effective in diverting attention. The psychological aspect of disguise played a crucial role. By manipulating perceptions, assassins could navigate hostile environments without arousing suspicion. In essence, the disguises of medieval assassins were a testament to their resourcefulness and adaptability. They didn't rely on elaborate costumes or high-tech gadgets. Instead, they used their wits, understanding of human behavior, and the resources at hand to become whoever they needed to be. It was a dirty, dangerous game, but for those who mastered it, it was the key to survival. If you thought medieval assassins had meticulously crafted escape plans, think again. The reality was far grimmer. Escape strategies were often little more than desperate improvisations, relying heavily on luck and the hope that chaos would provide cover. The notion of a well-planned getaway was a luxury few could afford, and even fewer could execute successfully. Take, for instance, the infamous assassination of Galeazzo Maria Sforza, Duke of Milan, in 1476. The conspirators, led by Giovanni Andrea Lampugnani, plotted the murder but neglected to plan an escape. After stabbing the Duke in a church, Lampugnani attempted to flee but was quickly caught and killed. His head was displayed as a warning to others, a grim reminder of the perils of ill-conceived escape plans. The Order of Assassins, or Nizari Ismailis, were renowned for their targeted killings during the medieval period. Their operatives, known as fidais, often accepted that escape was unlikely. They carried out assassinations in public spaces, fully aware that they would probably be killed immediately afterward. This willingness to die for their cause instilled fear in their enemies, as the assassins demonstrated that no amount of security could guarantee safety. In some cases, assassins attempted to blend into the crowd post-assassination, hoping the ensuing panic would allow them to slip away unnoticed. However, this was a risky gamble. The chaos could just as easily turn against them, with guards and bystanders quick to apprehend anyone suspicious. Disguises and prior knowledge of escape routes were crucial, but even these measures offered no guarantees. The story of John Felton, who assassinated George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, in 1628, illustrates the perils of inadequate escape planning. Felton made no effort to flee after the murder and was promptly arrested. His execution followed swiftly, and while his actions were celebrated by some, his lack of an escape plan ensured his demise. In essence, medieval assassins operated in a world where escape was uncertain at best. Their missions required not only meticulous planning and nerves of steel, but also a resignation to the possibility of death. The line between success and failure was razor thin, and even the most carefully laid plans could unravel in an instant. If you thought the life of a medieval assassin was perilous, the aftermath of their deeds was equally fraught with danger and uncertainty. Success in their mission did not guarantee safety or reward. Often, it marked the beginning of a new set of challenges, both external and internal. Consider the case of the Nizari Ismailis, commonly known as the Assassins. Operating from their mountain fortresses in Persia and Syria between the 11th and 13th centuries, they were renowned for their targeted killings of political and religious figures. While their actions instilled fear in their enemies, they also painted a target on their own backs. The Mongol Empire, viewing the assassins as a significant threat, launched a campaign that ultimately led to the destruction of their strongholds and the dissolution of their order by the late 13th century. The psychological toll on individual assassins was immense. Living in constant fear of betrayal or retribution, many found it difficult to reintegrate into society. The weight of their actions, coupled with the isolation inherent in their profession, often led to profound feelings of guilt and remorse. Historical records suggest that some sought solace in religious institutions, while others became recluses, haunted by the memories of their deeds. Moreover, the societal perception of assassins was complex. While some viewed them as necessary instruments of political change, others saw them as mere murderers. This dichotomy meant that even those who survived their missions were rarely celebrated openly. Instead, they lived in the shadows, their contributions acknowledged only in hushed tones or secretive circles. In essence, the aftermath of an assassination was a period of uncertainty and peril. Success did not equate to safety, and the psychological scars often outlasted any physical wounds. The life of a medieval assassin was not one of glory, but of constant vigilance, internal turmoil, and the ever-present specter of death. In the shadowy world of medieval assassins, silence wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. The very fabric of their existence was woven with secrecy, and any deviation from this unwritten code could spell doom. Speaking out, even inadvertently, was tantamount to signing one's own death warrant. The assassins, particularly the Nizari Ismailis, operated under strict oaths of secrecy. Their missions were shrouded in mystery, and operatives were expected to maintain absolute discretion. This culture of silence was so pervasive that even within their own ranks, information was compartmentalized. An assassin might not know the identity of their handler or the broader objectives of their mission. This ensured that if captured, they couldn't divulge critical information, even under duress. The consequences of breaking this silence were severe. Historical accounts suggest that those who betrayed the order faced brutal punishments, ranging from execution to prolonged torture. These measures served both as retribution and as a deterrent to others who might consider speaking out. This enforced silence extended beyond the operational aspects of their missions. Assassins often lived double lives, blending into society while hiding their true identities. This dual existence necessitated a constant vigilance, ensuring that no slip of the tongue or inadvertent gesture revealed their true nature. The psychological toll of this perpetual masquerade was immense, leading to feelings of isolation and alienation. Moreover, the very act of communication was fraught with peril. Even seeking help or expressing vulnerability could be construed as a breach of protocol. This created an environment where assassins were emotionally isolated, unable to form genuine connections or seek solace in others. The weight of their secrets became a solitary burden, carried in silence. In essence, the life of a medieval assassin was one of enforced muteness. Their voices were silenced, not just by external mandates, but by the internalized fear of retribution and the ingrained belief that silence was synonymous with survival. This culture of silence, while instrumental in their operational success, came at a profound personal cost, eroding their sense of self and severing their ties to the broader, human experience. In the fearful, rumor-fed villages of medieval Europe and the Near East, there was no such thing as a normal assassin. To the average peasant, a man who could sneak through castle walls and slit a noble's throat without being seen wasn't a person. He was a walking curse. A demon in a borrowed cloak, a shapeshifter wrapped in shadows. While the modern world tends to romanticize these hooded figures as gritty action heroes, the medieval mind processed them very differently. Back then, people didn't assume skill or stealth. They assumed sorcery. It started with how assassins moved. Quietly, invisibly, through locked doors and guarded courtyards, they slipped in and out like smoke. And if you were a 14th century pig farmer with 6 teeth and a healthy fear of thunder, that kind of movement wasn't stealth. It was witchcraft. Villagers spun stories about killers who could vanish at will, who could scale walls like lizards, who walked through locked doors or turned to mist when cornered. And when someone important died suddenly with no visible culprit, the story never stopped at, "he was stabbed." No, it was always, "he was cursed, he was hexed, a demon took him." In rural minds, assassins weren't trained, they were touched by something unholy. Even their tools became artifacts of terror. A rusty dagger wasn't just a blade, it was a cursed object, a magical implement soaked in blood and bound to demons. Poisons? That wasn't herbalism. It was dark alchemy. Frog guts under a full moon, roots gathered by a left-handed crone at midnight. You didn't study to make those. Spirits taught you. And if you were caught carrying one, it wasn't just illegal. It was a death sentence by pitchfork and fire. Their real danger was how they blurred the line between fact and fear. Every time a noble died mysteriously, rumors would spread that it was that man, the quiet stranger in town who didn't speak much, didn't drink much, and always seemed to be watching. People whispered that he spoke to animals, or that he'd buried something under the tavern steps. They'd say they saw him slip into a house through the chimney, or heard strange chanting the night before the priest choked on soup. None of it needed to be true. All it took was suspicion, and suspicion turned to rage very quickly in a superstitious age. Mob justice was not about due process. You didn't need a trial. Just an old woman who said she saw you mutter to your knife, and a farmer who remembered. Your boots looked too clean. That was enough. The next day, you'd be tied to a stake, accused of pacts with the devil, and set on fire before you had time to lie. And the villagers would sleep better, convinced they'd purged a monster from their midst. This fear wasn't just accidental. It was cultural. The medieval world was soaked in religious anxiety. Every drought, every famine, every plague was a sign of moral decay. And if you were poor, dirty, and prone to wandering alone at night, you fit the bill for decay very well. Priests preached about demons in human skin. Bards sang songs of shadow men with poisoned rings. And the truth, just a desperate man with a dagger, got swallowed whole by myth. Sometimes, even nobles believed the hype. Rulers would hire assassins in secret, then publicly claim their enemy was struck down by divine wrath or sorcery. It was politically convenient. Better to let the public think God had smited the Baron for his sins than admit you paid a drunk man 5 silver coins to do it with a butter knife. So assassins became legends not through their own telling, but through the lies others told about them. And it didn't help that some assassins leaned into the myth, After all, fear was a weapon. If people thought you could kill them with a whisper, they were less likely to ask questions. Some wore strange symbols, smeared herbs on their skin, or carried bones, not for magic, but for the reaction. If fear kept people back, it worked. But it also made them targets. In the end, the assassin's greatest enemy wasn't the guard with the sword. It was the terrified peasant with a torch and a Bible. It was the village that decided you were evil before you even opened your mouth. There was no escape from that. Because even if you survived the mission, survived the betrayal, survived the chase, all it took was one old man who thought your eyes were too black and your hands too smooth. You weren't mysterious. You were monstrous. And monsters didn't get second chances. When people today think of poison in the medieval world, they imagine something sleek and sinister. A single drop in a goblet, a nobleman sipping his wine, a subtle stagger, and then dramatic collapse. The assassin, hooded and calm, melts back into the shadows while lute music plays. But reality was far less theatrical and a whole lot messier. Poison wasn't a high art. It was a gamble, a crude experiment where the stakes were your target's life, your client's trust, and more often than not, your own digestive system. Let's start with the basics. Medieval poisons were unreliable. You weren't working with precise compounds developed in sterile labs. You had herbs pulled from dirt, mushrooms scraped off trees, and maybe the crushed glands of a toad if you were feeling ambitious. The most you could hope for was something that tasted terrible and made the target's stomach regret its choices. The worst? Something that looked lethal on paper, but actually just made the victim vomit, fart loudly in front of the archbishop, and live to make your life a nightmare. There was no instruction manual, no FDA warnings, no labels reading highly toxic, use sparingly. There was guesswork, superstition, and a whole lot of, let's see what happens. And even if you got the mixture right, you had to find a way to actually get it into the target's body. That meant the kitchen, the heart of any medieval household, and ironically, the worst battlefield imaginable. Imagine trying to slip something into a bowl of stew that's being stirred by a grumpy cook, tasted by 2 assistants, sniffed by the dog, blessed by the chaplain, and tested by a designated food taster, whose job was literally to die before the noble did. And you, the assassin, are in the corner trying to look like a legitimate servant while holding a suspicious vial and hoping no one notices that the broth smells like scorched walnuts and regret. Poisoning wasn't elegant. It was chaotic. You had to get close. You had to be fast. And you had to pray to whatever god you half believed in that the right person actually ate the tainted meal. And let's be honest, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes your target passed on the wine, gave the stew to the dog, or decided to fast because Mercury was in retrograde and the court astrologer said his spleen needed rest. You could spend weeks preparing a perfect dose only to have it end up in the hands of a hungover scribe who just wanted a snack. And even when everything went according to plan, when the poison reached the intended target and they actually ate it, you still weren't in the clear. Medieval poisons didn't always work quickly. Some took hours, some took days. One minute your mark is laughing at a dumb joke, the next he's turning pale, sweating, and requesting his favorite priest. Or worse, he throws up everything, mutters a prayer, and walks away angrier, alive, and very suspicious of his soup. Congratulations, you just gave your noble target indigestion and a reason to hire someone to kill you. Because here's the other thing. If the poisoning failed, or even if it succeeded but too obviously, you couldn't exactly run to HR and file a report. Your career didn't come with job security or even plausible deniability. There was no, oops, I guess I used too much henbane, my bad. If the job wasn't clean, discreet, and perfectly timed, the entire blame came crashing down on your head, and there were no second chances. You messed up, you died. Probably loudly, probably slowly, and probably while being interrogated with a metal object named something like the Jawcracker's embrace. There was no poison hotline to call for support, no mentor to troubleshoot what went wrong. Just you alone, panicking and hoping the other guy dies before you do. And even when everything did go right, when your victim collapsed, foamed at the mouth, and stopped breathing, you still didn't get applause. You didn't get credit. You didn't even get to breathe easy, because now came the most terrifying phase, the aftermath. Who else knows? Was it traceable? Did anyone see you near the kitchen? Is that food taster really dead, or just napping aggressively? The panic didn't stop when the heart did. It only ramped up. Sometimes your own tools betrayed you. That vial in your pocket cracked. That powder you handled with bare fingers got absorbed through your skin. Or that cup you swapped out. Yeah, you grabbed the wrong one. Now you're sweating, through your cloak, trying to remember if you're dizzy because of guilt, or because you just poisoned yourself. Yes, medieval assassins occasionally became their own victims. Because that's what poison really was. A desperate move in a desperate world. It wasn't stylish. It wasn't refined. It was a muddy, dangerous guess with consequences that could end you before they ended your target. So no, poison wasn't some elegant art form passed down by sages in mountain temples. It was a last resort, a messy craft born out of fear and necessity. A gamble. And in the game of medieval assassination, the house rarely lost. But you sure did. In the grand tapestry of history, some threads shine brightly, woven with the names of kings, queens, and conquerors. Their deeds are chronicled, their legacies celebrated. But among these illustrious figures lie the invisible hands that shaped events. The assassins. These shadowy figures altered the course of empires, yet their names are lost to time, their stories untold. Consider the Order of Assassins, or the Nizari Ismailis, who operated between 1090 and 1275 AD. Founded by Hassan al-Sabah, they were a formidable force, eliminating key figures to protect their interests. Yet, the identities of individual assassins remain largely unknown. The nature of their work demanded anonymity. To be recognized was to be vulnerable. Their success hinged on invisibility, on being ghosts in the annals of history. They didn't seek glory. They sought results. Even when their actions had monumental impacts, the credit rarely, if ever, went to them. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192, a pivotal moment during the Crusades, was orchestrated by the assassins. Yet, the names of those who carried out the deed are absent from historical records. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was by design. The assassins operated under strict secrecy. Their identities were compartmentalized, known only to a select few. This ensured that, even under torture, captured members couldn't compromise the organization. Their anonymity was both a shield and a curse. It protected them during their missions, but condemned them to obscurity afterward. They were the instruments of change, but never its face. Encyclopedia Britannica, this lack of recognition extended beyond their deaths. There were no monuments erected in their honor, no songs sung of their bravery. Their contributions were absorbed into the broader narrative, their personal stories forgotten. The psychological toll of such a life is hard to fathom. To dedicate oneself wholly to a cause, to risk everything, and yet remain unacknowledged, it requires a level of commitment few can comprehend. In modern times, the term assassin conjures images of lone wolves operating outside the bounds of society. But historically, these individuals were part of a larger structure, bound by codes and hierarchies. Their anonymity wasn't just a personal choice, it was institutional. The assassin's legacy is paradoxical. They were feared and respected in their time, yet their individual stories have vanished. Their impact is undeniable, but their identities remain a mystery. This anonymity challenges our understanding of heroism and legacy. It prompts us to consider the countless unnamed individuals who have shaped history from the shadows. In the end, the assassins teach us that influence doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes the most profound impacts are made by those who remain unseen, their names whispered only in the corridors of power, never etched in stone. In the clandestine world of medieval assassins, betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was an occupational hazard. The very individuals who commissioned these silent killers often became their most dangerous adversaries. The assassin's life was a perilous game of shadows, where today's employer could be tomorrow's executioner. Consider the case of Albrecht von Wallenstein, a prominent military leader during the 30 Years' War. Initially a trusted general of the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, Wallenstein's growing power and autonomy made him a perceived threat. In 1634, under the emperor's orders, a group of Irish and Scottish officers assassinated Wallenstein, turning the once valued commander into a liability eliminated by his own side. This pattern of betrayal wasn't unique. The very nature of an assassin's work, steeped in secrecy and devoid of witnesses, made them disposable assets. Once a mission was complete, the knowledge they possessed became a liability. Employers, fearing exposure or retribution, often chose to silence their hired killers permanently. The infamous Pazzi conspiracy of 1478 further illustrates this peril. Girolamo Riario, one of the orchestrators behind the plot to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici, found himself betrayed and murdered a decade later by members of the Orsi family. While the motives were complex, involving power struggles and financial disputes, the underlying theme remained. Those who deal in death often meet their end through the same means. Even in cases where assassins acted out of ideological conviction, betrayal loomed large. The Lisbon regicide of 1908 saw King Carlos I of Portugal and his heir assassinated by Republicans. While the immediate perpetrators were killed on the spot, the broader network of conspirators faced arrests and executions, often betrayed by their own ranks or political allies seeking to distance themselves from the fallout. The assassin's paradox lies in their very success. A flawlessly executed mission leaves no traces, no witnesses, and no loose ends, except the assassin themselves. Their continued existence becomes the final thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. Thus, eliminating the assassin becomes the ultimate act of self-preservation for those in power. In this treacherous dance of death, trust is a fleeting illusion. The assassin operates in a world where alliances are temporary, and loyalty is a currency devalued by fear. Each assignment carries not just the risk of failure but the looming specter of betrayal. The final blow, more often than not, comes not from an enemy's blade, but from the hand that once fed them. In the clandestine world of medieval assassins, the concept of retirement was as elusive as the shadows they inhabited. There were no pensions, no farewell banquets, no golden years spent recounting tales of daring exploits. Instead, the end of an assassin's career often mirrored its beginning, shrouded in secrecy, fraught with danger, and devoid of recognition. The very nature of their work precluded the possibility of a peaceful retirement. Assassins operated in the margins of society, their identities concealed, their deeds unacknowledged. To step away from the life meant exposing oneself to the very dangers that necessitated anonymity in the first place. Former employers, allies, and enemies alike could become threats, seeking to silence loose ends or exact revenge. Historical records offer scant evidence of assassins who successfully transitioned to civilian life. The lack of documentation is telling, suggesting that few, if any, managed to escape the cycle of violence and secrecy. The skills that made them effective, stealth, deception, lethality, were not easily transferable to peaceful professions. Moreover, the psychological toll of a life spent in the shadows left many ill-equipped for the routines of ordinary existence. The Order of Assassins, or Nizari Ismailis, exemplifies this grim reality. Operating between 1090 and 1275 AD, they were a formidable force, eliminating key figures to protect their interests. Yet the identities of individual assassins remain largely unknown. Their success hinged on invisibility, on being ghosts in the annals of history. They didn't seek glory, they sought results. Even when their actions had monumental impacts, the credit rarely, if ever, went to them. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192, a pivotal moment during the Crusades, was orchestrated by the assassins. Yet, the names of those who carried out the deed are absent from historical records. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was by design. The assassins operated under strict secrecy. Their identities were compartmentalized, known only to a select few. This ensured that, even under torture, captured members couldn't compromise the organization. Their anonymity was both a shield and a curse. It protected them during their missions but condemned them to obscurity afterward. They were the instruments of change, but never its face. This lack of recognition extended beyond their deaths. There were no monuments erected in their honor, no songs sung of their bravery. Their contributions were absorbed into the broader narrative, their personal stories forgotten. The psychological toll of such a life is hard to fathom. To dedicate oneself wholly to a cause, to risk everything, and yet remain unacknowledged, it requires a level of commitment few can comprehend. In modern times, the term assassin conjures images of lone wolves operating outside the bounds of society. But historically, these individuals were part of a larger structure, bound by codes and hierarchies. Their anonymity wasn't just a personal choice, it was institutional. The assassin's legacy is paradoxical. They were feared and respected in their time, yet their individual stories have vanished. Their impact is undeniable, but their identities remain a mystery. This anonymity challenges our understanding of heroism and legacy. It prompts us to consider the countless unnamed individuals who have shaped history from the shadows. In the end, the assassins teach us that influence doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes the most profound impacts are made by those who remain unseen, their names whispered only in the corridors of power, never etched in stone. In the clandestine world of medieval assassins, the concept of retirement was as elusive as the shadows they inhabited. There were no pensions, no farewell banquets, no golden years spent recounting tales of daring exploits. Instead, the end of an assassin's career often mirrored its beginning, shrouded in secrecy, fraught with danger, and devoid of recognition. The very nature of their work precluded the possibility of a peaceful retirement. Assassins operated in the margins of society, their identities concealed, their deeds unacknowledged. To step away from the life meant exposing oneself to the very dangers that necessitated anonymity in the first place. Former employers, allies, and enemies alike could become threats, seeking to silence loose ends or exact revenge. Historical records offer scant evidence of assassins who successfully transitioned to civilian life. The lack of documentation is telling, suggesting that few, if any, managed to escape the cycle of violence and secrecy. The skills that made them effective, stealth, deception, lethality, were not easily transferable to peaceful professions. Moreover, the psychological toll of a life spent in the shadows left many ill-equipped for the routines of ordinary existence. The Order of Assassins, or Nizari Ismailis, exemplifies this grim reality. Operating between 1090 and 1275 AD, they were a formidable force, eliminating key figures to protect their interests. Yet the identities of individual assassins remain largely unknown. Their success hinged on invisibility, on being ghosts in the annals of history. They didn't seek glory, they sought results. Even when their actions had monumental impacts, the credit rarely, if ever, went to them. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192, a pivotal moment during the Crusades, was orchestrated by the assassins. Yet, the names of those who carried out the deed are absent from historical records. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was by design. the assassins operated under strict secrecy. Their identities were compartmentalized, known only to a select few. This ensured that even under torture, captured members couldn't compromise the organization. Their anonymity was both a shield and a curse. It protected them during their missions, but condemned them to obscurity afterward. They were the instruments of change, but never its face. This lack of recognition extended beyond their deaths. There were no monuments erected in their honor, no songs sung of their bravery. Their contributions were absorbed into the broader narrative, their personal stories forgotten. The psychological toll of such a life is hard to fathom. To dedicate oneself wholly to a cause, to risk everything, and yet remain unacknowledged, it requires a level of commitment few can comprehend. In modern times, the term assassin conjures images of lone wolves operating outside the bounds of society. But historically, these individuals were part of a larger structure, bound by codes and hierarchies. Their anonymity wasn't just a personal choice. It was institutional. The assassin's legacy is paradoxical. They were feared and respected in their time, yet their individual stories have vanished. Their impact is undeniable, but their identities remain a mystery. This anonymity challenges our understanding of heroism and legacy. It prompts us to consider the countless unnamed individuals who have shaped history from the shadows. In the end, the assassins teach us that influence doesn't always come with recognition. Sometimes the most profound impacts are made by those who remain unseen, their names whispered only in the corridors of power, never etched in stone. In the annals of history, assassins are often portrayed as shadowy figures, masters of stealth and precision. Yet, behind the veil of mystery lies a series of blunders so absurd they could rival the most slapstick of comedies. These tales serve as a reminder that even the most meticulous plans can unravel in the most unexpected and hilarious ways. Take, for instance, the ill-fated attempt of an assassin who, in his eagerness to eliminate a target, forgot the cardinal rule of checking his surroundings. As he poised himself atop a thatched roof, dagger in hand, the structure gave way beneath him. He plummeted into a vat of fermenting ale, emerging not as a feared killer, but as the punchline of the local tavern's jokes for years to come. Then there's the story of the would-be poisoner who, having laced a goblet of wine with a deadly concoction, lost track of which cup was which. In a twist of poetic justice, he toasted to his own success and promptly collapsed, leaving his intended victim both alive and thoroughly amused. Historical records also recount the tale of an assassin who meticulously planned an ambush in a narrow alleyway. Unbeknownst to him, a chamber pot was being emptied from an overhead window at that very moment. Drenched and disoriented, he slipped, his weapon skittering out of reach, and was promptly apprehended by his would-be victim's guards. These anecdotes, while humorous, underscore a deeper truth. The life of an assassin was fraught with unpredictability. Despite rigorous training and careful planning, the smallest oversight could lead to failure, or worse, death. The romanticized image of the infallible killer dissolves when confronted with the reality of human error. Moreover, these misadventures highlight the perils of overconfidence. In one account, an assassin, convinced of his invincibility, attempted to scale a castle wall using a rope of his own design. Unfortunately, his craftsmanship left much to be desired. The rope snapped, sending him tumbling into a moat where he was promptly devoured by the resident swans, creatures far less benign than their graceful appearance suggests. Even the most seasoned assassins weren't immune to the caprices of fate. One veteran, renowned for his impeccable record, met his end when a sudden gust of wind blew his cloak into his face mid-pounce, causing him to miss his mark and impale himself on a decorative fountain. These stories, while entertaining, serve as cautionary tales. They remind us that no amount of skill can fully mitigate the chaos of the world. In the high-stakes game of life and death, sometimes it's the unexpected banana peel, literal or metaphorical, that determines the outcome. In the dimly lit corridors of our collective imagination, the figure of the assassin looms large, cloaked in mystery, shrouded in secrecy, and armed with an arsenal of lethal skills. This image, perpetuated by countless games and movies, has become the definitive portrayal of the assassin in popular culture. But how accurate is this depiction? Have we been led astray by the very media we consume? Take, for instance, the wildly popular video game series that has captivated millions, Assassin's Creed. With its intricate storylines and immersive historical settings, it offers players a chance to step into the shoes of a master assassin. Yet, as engaging as it is, the series takes significant liberties with historical facts. The developers themselves have acknowledged that while the game is inspired by historical events and figures, it is ultimately a work of fiction. The romanticized portrayal of assassins in media often glosses over the harsh realities of their existence. In truth, the life of an assassin was far from glamorous. It was a perilous path fraught with danger, betrayal, and a constant threat of death. The tools of their trade were rudimentary, their missions fraught with uncertainty, and their survival often hinged on sheer luck rather than skill. Moreover, the notion of a solitary assassin operating independently is largely a myth. Historical accounts suggest that assassins often worked within networks, relying on a web of informants, allies, and patrons. Their actions were not driven by personal vendettas, but were often politically motivated, serving the interests of powerful factions. The media's portrayal also tends to exaggerate the assassin's capabilities. The idea of scaling walls effortlessly, engaging in acrobatic combat, and vanishing into thin air is more fantasy than fact. In reality, assassins had to navigate complex social and political landscapes, often relying more on cunning and subterfuge than physical prowess. Furthermore, the depiction of assassins as morally ambiguous anti-heroes overlooks the ethical complexities of their actions. While some may have believed in a higher cause, others were mercenaries, driven by profit rather than principle. The line between hero and villain was often blurred, and their legacy is a testament to the murky nature of their profession. In conclusion, while games and movies have painted a compelling picture of the assassin, it's essential to separate fact from fiction. The true story is far more nuanced, revealing a world where survival depended on strategy, alliances, and a keen understanding of human nature. As we continue to consume media that romanticizes such figures, it's crucial to approach these narratives with a critical eye, recognizing the blend of truth and imagination that shapes our perceptions. So, after this deep dive into the grim realities of historical assassins, let's take a moment to reflect. The life of an assassin was far from the glamorous portrayals we've come to know through modern media. It was a path filled with peril, anonymity, and a constant threat of betrayal. The romanticized image of the noble assassin, fighting for a just cause, is largely a fabrication of our collective imagination. In truth, these individuals were tools of political machinations, their lives expendable, and their deaths often unacknowledged. They operated in the shadows, not for honor or glory, but because their existence was too inconvenient to be acknowledged publicly. Their stories were seldom told, and when they were, it was often through the lens of myth and legend, distorting the harsh realities they faced. Contrast that with our lives today. We live in an era where our basic rights are protected, where we have access to healthcare, education, and the freedom to express ourselves. We can walk the streets without fear of being caught in the crossfire of political intrigue. Our challenges are real, but they are not insurmountable. And they certainly don't involve the constant threat of death for merely existing. So the next time you find yourself yearning for the simpler times of the past, remember the assassins, remember the lives they led, the sacrifices they made, and the anonymity in which they existed. And then, take a moment to appreciate the complexities and freedoms of the present. If this journey through the shadows has intrigued you, sparked a thought, or even just entertained you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's continue to explore the untold stories of history together, shedding light on the past to better understand our present.